Hey again everyone, Lex here, and today is a big build update for this fire-themed shield warrior build I've been running to clear out the late endgame in the Rise of the Abyssal League, and I gotta say it's been feeling really damn good. In this video I'm going to go over the current version of this build that has dominated pretty much everything, again, that the late endgame has to offer in this league, you know, like tier 15 and 16 maps, tier 4 simulacrums, Uber Arbiter and the other pinnacle bosses, etc. And this build features no uniques, aside from a couple lineage support gems, not even any of the really pricey ones if you want to count those, but we're not using constricting command or anything, just a bunch of rares, and I know those are usually stronger than unique stat-wise most times, but it's probably one of the cheaper builds that I've made capable of tackling the endgame, honestly, despite having a few div cost pieces here and there. Last time I went over my build from leveling to maps, and this time I will briefly go over how I got the build to where it was, but I am mostly going to focus on the new stuff, what has changed from the previous video. So if you are just getting started with Shield Warrior, I'd recommend watching that first one, then checking this one out once you've hit maps. And before we get started, I wanted to give a quick shout out to Allocates Beef. He has a great version of a crit focused version of a Shield Warrior build that does some pretty crazy burst damage, honestly, with enough setup. Mine is not quite as bursty, I would say, as his, but still hits very hard with a ton of ignite damage attached to each shield wall that we'll get into in a second. But I just wanted to mention his channel and this video because I think he deserves some more subs for the effort he put into that guide. But that's enough of an intro. Let's get into how these skill gems are looking because they are quite different from last time. Alright, I feel like I always say this, but in the essence of saving time, I'm going to go over the biggest differences between the skill gems in this version of the build compared to the last one. Again, there's a good bit of explanation in that last video, so if I don't cover something here that you have a question about, it's probably in that last one. But I just really wanted to focus on the important endgame stuff here, like where our damage is coming from, you know, our defenses, utility things, and so on. So we're going to be skipping both weapon set Mace strikes here and raise shield, just because I don't really use these anymore, honestly. I mean, the only thing to mention here is that Mace strike damage is relevant to Stomping Ground, which is a support gem that I use in shield charge, and it is relevant to Armor Explosion, another support gem, but I don't actually use that anymore in Resonating Shield. So if anything, just pump up the damage on those Mace strikes with, you know, some spare support gems. And there is Encase In Jade, but I mostly use this for the passive, honestly. This is just an extra flat 10% physical damage reduction, which is kind of nice. You can consume those stacks of Jade to give yourself a bunch of guard, but guard only absorbs hit damage, and we're already blocking most hit damage with how we're clearing with Resonating Shield, so honestly I just use it for the passive physical damage reduction. Anyway, starting with the actual skills, Shield Charge is here, socketed in a way to increase stun buildup, but really only relevant to maps. I don't really use this buildup to stun pinnacle bosses or anything, and Rage 3 and Rapid Attacks 3 are here to speed up the animation. So just a couple things with Shield Charge. It's pretty good for covering distance and initiating on a group. Its damage is kind of trash now, though it is an attack that shoots out a shield wave from Fortifying Cry, which is actually a lot of damage. So if you are buffed with Fortifying Cry, which you should be all the time with this build, you can actually use this to deal some pretty good damage at the collision point of your charge. So not a bad thing to use mid-battle when you want to cover some ground and block while doing so. It's also not a bad option for just getting around maps generally. It's actually faster than Sprint at this point, but you'll have to, you know, click more buttons to animation cancel and make it more worth it. So if you're feeling lazy, you can Sprint, but this is definitely the faster and safer option since you can't get knocked down and you block all attacks while charging. Just something to think about. Last thing, and I did say this in the previous video, but it is worth touching upon again. Remember, currently this ability does not build up your stun meter as you are blocking attacks, so if you ever notice yourself about to be heavy stunned in a tough situation, you can just use this to get out safely, or you can use it to continue clearing mobs. Obviously not as effective as Resonating Shield, but you can just keep using this until the stun meter empties, and then you can go back to resonating everything down again. Alright, next skill is Magma Barrier. So I'm going to be honest with you guys, I still really like this skill. It hits super hard. I think it actually has the most listed DPS out of anything we're using. Yeah, it has 119k listed DPS, and I know listed DPS doesn't mean that much since there are so many multipliers that don't get listed, but this is still likely one of, if not just straight up, our hardest hitting ability. However, and I can't believe I'm about to say this, but it's sort of optional at this point. The damage is crazy, don't get me wrong, but this is definitely not something this build hinges on anymore. Most of our damage is coming from Fortifying Cry and Shield Walls, so you could opt to swap this out with another aura, like Time of Need or Scavenged Plating if you're not running either of those. How I use it though is twofold. One, it's a really useful single target nuke for those more stubborn rares and map bosses. They all have blockable attacks, and it's honestly super easy to get this to go off on all of them. So I use it a lot for like assassinating a rare or something in a big group of enemies. And two, it's got a sort of niche role against pinnacle bosses as well. The 8-second cooldown on this thing sucks, but that sort of makes it perfect for scaling ignite damage on it, since you can just hit something super hard and initiate the cooldown, then the target is going to take a bunch of ignite damage in the meantime before the next Magma Barrier is active. So honestly, I kind of dig it. Obviously, it's a little harder to trigger Magma Barrier on some pinnacle bosses like Zesh, who perform mostly unblockable attacks and things like this, but other than that, it's pretty easy to initiate this ignite on pretty much everyone else, since the new active block can trigger on any attack that doesn't have the red animation lined up. So with that in mind, the support gems it is socketed with are aimed at boosting up its hit damage and ignite duration. I'll just mouse over them quickly here, as well as fire penetration 2, which just straight up removes all fire resistance from your target. I have one of these socketed into most of my damaging abilities, to be honest. It helps a lot with those fire resistant mobs and elites on maps, obviously, but also with pinnacles, as they don't have a ton of fire resistance, but it keeps it at 0 and makes our exposure effect coming up in a bit put their resistance into the negatives for like a pretty significant damage boost. Alright, next up, Resonating Shield. So what has become obvious to me over the course of using this ability for, well, everything, is that this skill is foundational to the build because of 3 things. Triggering Fortifying Cry's shield wave in a circle around you to clear groups, breaking armor, obviously, and pure utility. This is not a damage skill, it is basically the medium that all of your damage skills rely on to do their thing, if that makes any sense. I mean, that's basically it. I think what makes this skill so useful, aside from what I just mentioned, is again, the buff to active block making you essentially immune to all hit damage, which means you can just walk into a group of mobs, channel this ability, and not worry about hit damage. As long as you have some shield waves queued up from Fortifying Cry, clearing becomes so easy and so satisfying. You can also animation cancel this ability, as I've mentioned in the past, for faster shield waves, but in scarier situations, I actually find myself just channeling continuously a bit more, again, just to avoid any hit damage. It feels very strong, you clear very effectively while protecting yourself at the same time. The clearing feels great, don't even need trample toe anymore, feels really nice since I relied so heavily on those boots for so long. So support gems are where this gets interesting. Rage is obviously a no-brainer, we're building it up all the time since we're spamming this quite often, even against bosses, and I have Ignite 3 here because even though this skill doesn't deal a ton of damage, I do want things to be ignited more often than not, since we have some passive skill tree nodes that deal increased damage on ignited and burning enemies. And this is where fire exposure is socketed. It lasts 8 seconds upon the skill igniting a target, and this is another reason why I have Ignite socketed here, but we mostly want this for pinnacle boss fights to inflict that negative resistance on them after building up flammability, and we can just tap them with this skill real quick and put exposure on them. I also have Uruk Smelting here. Uruk, I think that's how you pronounce that. You know, I played around with this and like exploit weakness and batter shout to try and rapidly remove fully broken armor over and over again to get that permanent 2% physical damage, like stacking buff up as quickly as I could, but overall I just found like it took too long to set up, and I'd rather just go with my tried and true combo, just getting shield walls out earlier and burning them down with big fire damage and ignites. So this is still here though, just adds a big chunk of armor break and does technically increase the damage of our other skills over the course of a fight. And I know it says physical damage, but I am pretty sure this actually applies to fire damage. I have to test this a bit more, but I think it does because of the wording on the Molten One's Gift passive skill, and also the note under Sunder's Sundered Armor effect found in the Path of Exile 2 database. More testing is needed probably, but I think this is potentially a pretty strong support gem if this works with fire damage the way that I think it does, but you know, I guess it would be strong for a pure physical damage build too when you remove the guesswork, but anyways. Next up, Fortifying Cry. We've been talking about this one a lot already, and I mean, there's not a whole lot to say at this point. I mentioned before how strong this is with Warbringer. Having no cooldown on this Warcry is really nice, but kind of whatever since you can bypass the cooldown normally with Rage or Endurance charges anyway. But it's really the Corpse Explosion aspect that is so strong. It really does help with clearing, like, a lot. I often just find myself just doing 2 or 3 ticks of Resonating rejuvenating shield and then shouting real quick to blast a group and then continuing on. Sometimes I'll stock up more corpses for a bigger bang, just tons of AoE damage, and it makes clearing feel literally unstoppable. You can just walk into a group of almost any size and cut through them without any fear of death. Just, you know, keep an eye on your stun buildup in case you need to chill out. This also plays a major role in Pinnacle boss fights when comboed with Shield Wall. So I think I was incorrect in the last video with my wording, but I want to explain how this works here. Fortifying Cry doesn't actually empower your shield wall, it empowers the shield wave attack, which it creates on all of your shield skills. You know, obviously with resonating and shield charge like we talked about earlier. But with shield wall, these empowered shield waves from each segment deal a ton of damage. It's not the shield wall that's being empowered, but the shield waves created by Fortifying Cry, and it hits really hard. You basically benefit from the damage and whatever Fortifying Cry is socketed with, as well as shield wall, and this is where a ton of our boss killing damage comes from. Shield wall can also be detonated instantly by shield charge and Infernal Cry as well, but you'd be losing a ton of damage by doing so, so you really want to use Fortifying Cry to detonate in all cases. But you know, that's enough about that. I think you get the idea of how good this ability is. So I'll real quick just mouse over these. For the most part, these are aimed at increasing its fire damage as much as possible, or getting through fire resistance with fire penetration 2 again. Nothing here that prevents it from inflicting elemental ailments, because this is one of our harder hitting abilities, so we want to make sure that this does ignite in all cases. However, we need to talk about this one a little bit. Second Wind 3. So you can see by the tooltip, this normally just lowers the cooldown rate by 40% of the skill it is socketed into, while also healing 2% of your maximum life on use per second cooldown of the supported skill. So the benefit basically being able to heal yourself when you use the skill, while trading off an extra use of the skill for a much longer cooldown, which in turn makes it heal more. So under normal circumstances, it may be selectively worth it, but we're Warbringer. Our Warcries don't have cooldowns. You can literally spam this skill and heal yourself for, let's see, about 18% of your life, a little bit more, every time you shout. Yeah, shout out to one of my viewers, Ivan, I'm shortening the name here so I don't butcher it, who tipped me off on this one. Tried it out and it is definitely a strong interaction, and I decided to stick with it because its usefulness for survivability is just too damn good. But let's move on to Shield Wall. Only a bit has changed here. It is no longer socketed with Exploit Weakness because since our fire damage applies to all fully broken armor effects, I figure we probably don't want to remove it and instead take advantage of that extra damage by socketing it with some strong damage supports that, again, don't remove fully broken armor like Exploit Weakness does. This also means we have to worry less about positioning. We want to place these shield walls right on top of bosses so that shield waves from Fortifying Cry overlap, and for our close combat 2 support gems, obviously. Also, the wall crumbling for 80% less damage by bumping into the boss before you detonate it would actually remove the fully broken armor with Exploit Weakness socketed, so we definitely don't want that. As you can see, it is socketed with one lineage support gem, so let's talk about that. Rigwald's Ferocity. This one is a little pricey for lineage support, but not even so bad. Last time I checked, it was like 60 Exalted or so. If this is currently a bit out of your price range, just don't worry about it. Throw some other damage increasing support gem that doesn't get rid of Ignite. Ignite is actually pretty decent on this build. But yeah, as you can see from the tooltip, 20% more attack speed, but 15% less damage in weapon set 1, and 10% less attack speed, but 30% more damage if used in weapon set 2. This works out perfectly because although the attack speed reduction sucks, that's just a big boost in damage for pinnacle bosses in weapon set 2. And we can also afford to use this if we need to during faster paced scenarios while mapping, or in something like a simulacrum to take out those bosses that happen to spawn with the huge attack speed increase in weapon set 1. Oh, and the rest of the support gems are pretty familiar by now. This is kind of what I'm putting into most of my damaging skills, so you know, same story here. For pinnacle boss fights, basically you want to always make sure you Infernal Cry before using this ability and slap this thing down right on top of the boss and then Fortifying Cry to detonate it. With how my current skill speed is, it doesn't make sense to slap 2 down back to back since my rage will start decaying. We just want to slap 1 wall down, Fortifying Cry to blow it up, and then Infernal Cry to keep the rage going. Maybe one resonating shield tap to make sure fire exposure is on there, and then slap down another, Fortifying Cry, etc. That's the basic rotation for damage while the right debuffs are up. Speaking of which, Sunder is here, a new addition to the build and socketed in a way for pure utility, not direct damage, because what Sunder does for us is inflict the Sundered Armor debuff, which increases the physical damage your target takes by 20%. However, as I said earlier, this debuff also applies to fire damage due to that passive, the Molten One's Gift, and all modifiers that apply to fully broken armor apply to Sundered armor as well. So yeah, super useful skill. We apply this as soon as we fully armor break a pinnacle boss, which is honestly pretty quick if you're using Shield Wave. It's like 1 to 2 uses of it, I think. Then we Sunder, and we have Sundered armor up for a whopping 17 seconds, which is plenty of time to Infernal Cry and wait for a moment to plop down a shield wall on top of the boss and Fortifying Cry. Though I would do everything I can to make sure you're maintaining your rage stacks to avoid losing any damage. You know, just you can tap them with Resonating Shield real quick, or spam Infernal Cry in the interim. Anyway, supports are aimed at increasing attack speed while maintaining rage stacks with Rage 3 here. Pretty straightforward, and the prolonged duration is also here so that we can have Sundered armor up for those 17 seconds. And that's pretty much it. No more support gems here to keep the cost of the ability down. Honestly, this became much more useful for this build since they changed the crit to that Sundered armor debuff in the last update, so I love it. Next is Infernal Cry. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this. It empowers your shield walls and technically your shield charges, but really you want this on your shield walls every time you put one down. They gain a huge chunk of their damage as fire damage when empowered with this, and it is socketed in a way to decrease its cost and bump up its utility. It's also socketed with Second Wind 3 for pretty much the same reason Fortifying Cry is, and technically you will heal more with this shout since the cost is much lower than Fortifying Cry, just something to keep in mind. Oh, and one other thing to mention, but with this build and the way this skill is socketed, you can literally spam this before the start of a pinnacle boss fight or during one to gain or maintain stacks of rage, respectively. And you don't have to worry about the health drainer cost because, once again, Second Wind 3. But yeah, this is actually super useful if you want to start the fight with maximum stacks of rage, or if you just want to prevent rage from decaying in the middle of a fight. Just throw a shout out there or spam it. This usually makes your initial hits against a boss hit way harder than without maximum stacks. Alright, the last two skills are auras. We have Scavenged Plating instead of Time of Need, because between those two shouts and Second Wind 3, we are healing a ton and we don't really need that extra healing, especially since we have it on demand. I do miss the curse removal, honestly, at times, but the extra armor from Scavenged Plating makes us feel quite invulnerable, especially when stacking elemental damage reduction from armor, so in my opinion, pretty worth it. And then Berserk is still here for the same reason as last time, significantly more damage from rage stacks. These are both socketed with survivability gems. Cannibalism 1, not 2 because I don't have the spirit. I would if I had it. So I'm running Vitality 2 over it instead, since this one jumps from 1 to 2% rather than 2 to 3% on cannibalism. It just seems like more of an upgrade to me, but again, I might swap some of these out because we have a bunch of healing from the shouts already. I'd probably try some of the ailment specific ones like Cool-Headed or Warm-Blooded, and potentially Precision if to help free up some itemization so that I don't, need as much accuracy. Still thinking about it, but that's currently where my head is at. And that is all the skill gems, guys. I tried to keep the length of this section down, but there was a lot of new stuff to talk about, so honestly, it's probably a similar length to usual. I hope you find some of what I go over useful, but let's move on to the passive skill tree where we also have a bunch of new changes. Alright, once again I'll start by just running a mouse over of the whole skill tree while I'm talking here. There are quite a few changes, and obviously I have all of my ascendancy points since the last video, and I've redistributed quite a few passive points based on how I've been playing and what I felt like I wanted more of versus what I didn't need so much. We are also using 2 weapon sets now, which shouldn't be surprising since I just mentioned this with Rigwald's Ferocity, and though this new instant weapon swap in the game is nice, we're not really utilizing that swapping mid-fight or anything. Basically, weapon set 1 is used for group clearing and normal bosses encountered while mapping and in simulacrums, while weapon set 2 is used for pinnacle bosses exclusively. Alright, let's start with the ascendancy. I put my last 4 points into increased armor break here, imploding impacts, which lets us break armor below 0, so negative armor, which does amplify physical damage, but I'm going to talk about this a little more in a second. and then increased armor into Jade Heritage. We basically already talked about the Encase In Jade skill and why this is here, but I do want to talk about imploding impacts for a second. So we know from the Molten One's gift that the fully broken armor effects that we have on our build do apply to fire damage, which is awesome. However, I'm not so sure that the negative armor from this actually apply to fire damage. It says fully broken armor effects, but I'm not sure if negative armor counts as a fully broken armor effect. This seems like it would just apply to physical damage, you know? So I have to play around with this a little bit more, but if it does not apply to fire damage, honestly, I might switch ascendancies. I could see Smith of Katava being actually pretty good. I know a lot of people thought it got nerfed really hard, but honestly, it still frees up a ton of itemization by having all of your, you know, fire resistance applied to all resistances, and it has some pretty nice fire like themed nodes that I think could be useful. You know, it still has that like cast fire spell on hit thing, which could be good for maintaining ignite on something or exposure on something. So I might switch ascendancies and experiment with something else, but you know, I'm going to stick with it for now until I can confirm that this actually has no effect on fire damage. But with that said, let's go over the rest of the passive skill tree, just the biggest changes from the previous video. If you want to see the entire passive skill tree, there will obviously be a build link in the description box of this video, as well as a Path of Exile 2 Ninja link if you want to follow my build in real time as I upgrade it and change it, etc. So we'll start with this bit over here. I just put a bunch of these nodes into weapon set 1, our clearing set, because honestly, stun buildup and area of effect don't really matter for pinnacle bosses, so I mean, it just makes sense in my opinion, and well, that's that. And I've obviously spec'd out of these one-handed weapon nodes because we are pretty much using our shield stats exclusively for our skills. Threw some weapon set 1 points in here for bolstering Yell. I know it's a little inefficient with this point being Warcry cooldown reduction. We obviously don't need that, but let me explain. Bolstering Yell reads, empowered attacks deal 30% increased damage, very nice, but also Warcry skills have a 30% area of effect, which is decent, but what makes this portion great is that it also applies to shield wave since it is tacked on to Fortifying Cry. At least I'm 90% sure, because anything that modifies Warcry damage modifies shield wave damage. So it would follow that the shield wave area of effect is increased, and I'm pretty sure it is from my testing. Going down this way, what's new here is that we still have Towering Shield, but once again set to weapon set 1, very useful for getting near block cap after active blocking with an attack. Truth be told, we don't really care that much about passive block anymore since active block is just really all you need, but there are still many moments where your shield is down as you are repositioning or something, so it feels good to have that extra defensive cushion for those situations. Down here we have these juicy ailment magnitude nodes, especially with this notable that increases the duration as well for trading off a bit of attack speed. But listen guys, I understand how much of a meme Ignite is. I understand that it is technically inefficient scaling wise, but what can I say? I am determined to make it work since I love these fire tank themed builds, and I gotta say, it definitely helps. Obviously, we are decimating bosses super fast, but there are times when you're gonna have to play defensive for a while. You know, if they use a move that sort of interrupts your setup, or your shield wall nuking where you have to block, dodge, or roll back for a bit. Or there will be a move that they use where it's very hard to get hit damage on them, like Arbiter when he starts dashing around in phase 1 to get those flame seeds to show up, and that's where Ignite damage becomes useful, at least in my opinion. Moving on, we have all these empowered attack nodes here. I mean, you should basically never be throwing out an unempowered normal attack. So for our purposes, this is just straight up attack damage, and vocal empowerment is a really nice notable that gives us 1 extra empowered attack no matter what we're doing. It feels kind of useful when clearing and against bosses, honestly, to just have an extra attack that you can rely on, especially with Infernal Cry when you're slapping down those shield walls. And once again, for Fortifying Cry and its following shield waves, we have Cacophony. That's 40% increased damage with Warcries and 25% increased area of effect. This isn't set to a weapon set because that's a pretty big chunk of damage, and I want that hitting everything. Armor break stuff down here, as well as Irreparable, which you could actually set to weapon set 2 if you wanted, because during pinnacle boss fights is when we care the most about fully broken armor and therefore sundered armor duration. It gives us a bit more freedom to spam some shield walls. Also, Punctured Lung is interesting, obviously fairly useful in a handful of situations, but this can basically trivialize the Ulroth fight, as you saw in the intro clip, because he needs to regen his health before phase 2, and this doesn't let him do that. So he just does the animation and stays at 0% health. He just doesn't have a phase 2 essentially. He just throw a rock at them. Down here we have a bunch of rage nodes next to the Molten One's gift, just a bunch of maximum rage limit nodes so that we can stack our rage higher and thus get more damage. These two are set to weapon set 1 though, and with these two, when you are at maximum rage, you are very hard to stun, or I guess it's as the more rage you have, the harder you are to stun. It's honestly super important and very useful for simulacrums especially. Honestly, I don't have any issues with stun buildup anymore after grabbing this. It's actually really strong. And real quick, I guess I should talk about this one here. This is my anointment, and listen, I get it. Normally you want to go to some far out node that is way out of your country and grab some more damage, which you can still do if you want to, you know. You can go up here and grab like Volcanic Skin or something, 20% fire resist and gain 8% of all damage, as fire damage would be quite good. But after spec'ing over here normally previously, the quality of life provided from this node is honestly just so hard to live without once you experience it. Having your heavy armor not hinder your movement speed at all is just such a big speed boost, and obviously can help you with clear speed and avoiding pinnacle boss mechanics, and on top of that, it basically freed up 9 passive skill tree points for me since I didn't want to live without it. So that's my reasoning for this anointment here. But if you want more damage, I would recommend going for Volcanic Skin or some other notable damage node. Back up here we still have these points, but we set them to weapon set 2, our boss killing set, where we care a bit more about ignite magnitudes and fire damage against burning or ignited targets. And we have this branch over here also set to weapon set 2, another big damage boost against burning enemies as well as burning nature, a big chunk of fire damage and ignite duration. It feels pretty good for just 1 point attached to some already decent damage nodes. And you can see even more weapon set 2 stuff up here, ignite magnitude and flammability nodes with some strength here. And this string, which is interesting. So the lead up is kind of underwhelming, just 8% ignite duration per point, but this notable is actually really cool. Melting Flames, which reads, enemies ignited by you permanently take 1% increased fire damage for each second they have ever been ignited by you, up to a maximum of 10%. We are once again igniting a lot, so this is just a free 10% more damage for all of your abilities. Obviously this is more relevant for longer boss fights, namely Uber Arbiter, so you could pass this small branch up if you wanted more hit damage somewhere else, you know, but hey, what can I say? I like the effect. Oh, one thing that I passed and forgot to mention is Roaring Cries. This makes our Warcries have a minimum of 10 power even when you're not hitting anything. So this is the ability that lets us spam Infernal Cry and just build up rage before a boss fight even starts. It just counts us as having 10 power every time we shout, no matter what we're hitting, and that's basically 8 rage per shout. So you just spam that, get up to your max stacks, and then you're just going to be hitting really hard with those first few hits. I should mention, obviously, we are blood magic now. Since healing with shouts is so easy, it just makes sense to use our health to cast knowing this. And the last bit is up here, traveling aways for these nodes, but also the jewel socket here, which is really great. And we have some Warcry speed nodes into Guttural Roar, a big chunk of Warcry speed, area of effect, and debilitating enemies, which I think is more useful in like crowded situations, especially the AoE stuff, which is why it is set to weapon set 1. We also have Deafening Cries, which is actually a little anti-synergistic with Second Wind 3 since it ups our Warcry cooldown recovery. If you don't have this notable, you'll actually heal a lot more every time you Warcry, but getting that 8% increased damage for each recent Warcry is really nice, not just for clearing, but also again for bossing. Like you can spam cries and you'll get a ton more damage. You can watch your listed DPS go up, honestly, just standing there. It's pretty significant, and obviously you're not going to be spamming cries the whole time, but it is really strong for those first few hits. Oh, and the last branch up here is for Warcry speed into fire damage into Cremating Cries. Empowered attacks gain 15% of physical damage as fire damage. Super strong, to be honest. I could honestly use a bit more base physical to take more advantage of these effects, but I just gotta spend some more time trading and crafting is all. Last thing I'll mention are my jewel choices. Honestly, I just went with rubies for now with these 2 rolls where possible. 25% increased damage against fully armor broken targets, and empowered attacks deal 20% increased damage. These are the max rolls for both. Choose whatever you can. That's good for these suffixes, but just no rage on melee swing because it's currently bugged and overrides the rage 3 support gem, so be sure to avoid that. But basically whatever defensives you want, like life regen or stun threshold, etc. What's most important is those 2 rolls just to maximize your damage with these jewels. But other than that, guys, that's what the passive skill tree is currently looking like. Again, links will be below in the description box for the build, but let's keep it moving by going over the gear next. Alright, like before, we'll start with a general mouse over of my gear as usual, but we are not using any uniques, which I'm honestly pretty proud of myself for putting together. I'm obviously, when looking at straight stats, almost all good rares are gonna be better than uniques again, but we're not exploiting any broken combo or statuses, no constricting command, get that meta crap out of here. But yeah, let's start with the weapon. We'll start with weapon set 2, our boss killing set. There is a particular role that you want on it from the new abyssal stuff, or a particular 2 roles. I mean, obviously, since we're Avatar of Fire, the most important rolls or crafts on the weapon are elemental damage with attacks, gain damage as extra fire damage from that new perfect fire essence, and +5 to all melee skills. However, this one down here at the bottom is super important. Dealing 57% increased damage against enemies with fully broken armor is just a huge chunk of damage. There's also another abyssal roll or abyssal desecration that gives you like 50-ish% or more on empowered attacks, which is also really good. I think either of those would be powerful as far as like the abyssal desecration stuff goes. I think they can actually roll the same percentages, so definitely want to go for those two. And as we just said, since this is our boss killing set, we have Farrell's Runes of the Hunt socketed here, 2 of them for 50% more attack damage against rare or unique enemies. Perfect for this weapon set and better than the elemental damage soul cores. Weapon set 1, our group clearing set. Honestly, this weapon ain't bad, but the other one is obviously better with its base rolls. And this one did not grant us the extra socket with the corruption, but if it did, I would have socketed it with another elemental damage soul core, because we want this to hit harder against everything, not just rares and uniques, since we are clearing groups with this set. Reach rings are here, just a combination of stats and fire damage, fire resistance, and maximum life with fire modifiers increased. These are pretty good, I think. I would have liked some more flat fire damage to attacks for a more ideal set, but these are fine, clearly helping out, and yeah, some accuracy on this left one so that we're hitting 100% of our close range hits. Helmet also has accuracy as well, straightforward stats otherwise. Some armor applies to elemental damage, which I've been stacking a bit of. Socketed with a bear rune for more AoE, obviously with clearing in mind, but there's also a soul core that actually increases your maximum rage stacks by 4, and I think that could also work here unless you need a socket for resistances or something. That's what I'd recommend. Alright, this amulet is one of the pricier pieces on me, but not even that crazy. I think I got it for like 4 or 5 div. But the +3 to all melee is great. If you're a little low on currency, just go for a +2. But other than that, just life and armor would be good, whatever resistance you need. Spirit as well, hopefully. The mana roll here is actually useless to me now. I'm realizing I might be in the market for a new one soon. Shield, 1.3k armor. You want a big armor rating shield. 1.2k is also fine and a lot cheaper, but obviously all of your shield skills will hit a lot harder with a higher armor rating shield. And this one has some decent resistance rolls. I think I would have loved some maximum resistance or like a physical damage reduction roll on this one, but you know, hey, it's hitting really hard, so I can't complain. And I'm also using this one for both weapon sets, as you saw earlier, which is such a great change, honestly. Good thinking, GGG. Boots are pretty straightforward, just as much movement speed as you can with whatever resistances and life you can get. Obviously, mine can use more movement speed, so I'm going to be shopping around for that. And my belt here is also honestly kind of crap. I think I like a plate belt for more implicit armor, or maybe a utility belt that implicitly applies a portion of your healing instantly with resistance rolls, max life, and strength, or something like that. This one is quite bad. Oh, and the gloves. Obviously, +2 melee skill. Do not forget this. Armor if you can. Maximum life if you can. And I think that's basically it. I think some flat damage to attacks if you can afford to, or maybe some attack speed, but overall I just value the melee skill and the life, honestly. The sockets on this are 2 Courtesan Manon's Runes of Cruelty. I think that's how you pronounce it. These just give us a total of 30% more ignite magnitude, which with this build is putting in some work, as you have hopefully seen from the clips, or will see here shortly. And real quick, just to look at my overall character stats, armor is okay at only 10k with 82% reduction, and I'm fairly certain that this reaches 90% with full Scavenged Plating stacks, so I guess we're basically capped when breaking armor. Life could obviously be quite a bit higher due to some missing or lower rolls on gear. I could also shift some passive points around probably to get more life and strength, but I might miss my damage a little too much. I'm also not that close to block cap on either set. You can see 42 is actually the highest that it gets. I just don't find passive block to be that useful anymore. Again, with active block being so good, and with our stun threshold being so high, we don't really have a worry about our being heavy stunned. As long as you have a bunch of rage, you can just be active blocking the whole time, which is just better than passive block. So honestly, I don't really feel as as much of a need to be block capped in this league, at least. But regardless, even with my armor at just 10k, I feel pretty tanky again with the Second Wind 3 and Warcry spam. I'm just constantly healing up as I'm spamming those Warcries, and if I really need to heal up at some point, I can spam Infernal Cry, and it just heals me up very quickly from like a damage over time effect or whatever it could be. You just spam Infernal Cry, which heals more than Fortifying Cry, and you can just survive most things. It's actually pretty incredible. As always, I'm going to leave you with some gameplay of the build. That's pretty much all there is to talk about, guys. Sorry this one took so long, but I was experimenting with all kinds of crazy stuff before I settled on this setup, and I wanted to present you with a build that I was confident could tackle all of what this league had to offer. Oh, and real quick, if you are interested, I made a new Discord for you guys. I had a previous one that I was linking to in my videos, but this is a brand new one for this community. It's definitely Path of Exile 2 focused, but overall it's going to be a place where you can hang out, chat, and share our passion for this game. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video. Keep an eye out for the next one, which will not take as long as this one, I assure you, and I will see you then.
Believe me, you will fall exile. Chasms of flame shall restore your affliction. Soon erased. Coursing through time to find you. Submit, Plagueborn. The mother soul must